Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, investigating the for-profit addiction recovery industry. We talked to the author of a new book about the unpaid labor force that finances the billion-dollar addiction treatment industry, often on the backs of patients. Later, an Emmy-nominated movie writer explains why he chose the First Coast for the world premiere of his new comedy. But first, while the opioid crisis has generated a lot of focus on the causes of addiction and the culpability of pharmaceutical companies, there's been much less scrutiny on the backside of the disaster, rehab. My next guest has spent the past 8 years investigating the multi-billion-dollar drug rehabilitation industry. Shoshana Walter works as a staff writer for the Marshall Project covering criminal justice. Her work has earned her Edward R. Murrow and Livingston Awards, and in 2018, she was named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. I recently had the opportunity to sit down with her to discuss her new book, Rehab, An American Scandal. Shoshana Walter, thank you so much for being here. This is a project that you've worked on since about 2017, and you've found a lot of problems with the for-profit rehab and sober living facilities. Can you kind of lay out for us? I mean, one of the big things that you've uncovered is the use of unpaid labor. Tell us about this practice, if you can.
Yeah, about 8 years ago, I was working at Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting and just kind of stumbled across this program that was utilized by courts throughout Arkansas and Oklahoma as an alternative to incarceration. But what I learned about this program they were using was that it was sending people to work at unpaid jobs at chicken processing plants, where they were making chicken products for KFC and Popeyes and Walmart and PetSmart. And I never heard of anything like this before. And it just made me wonder, in this day and age, when we all seem to have accepted this notion of addiction as a disease worthy of treatment, why in this day and age is unpaid labor being considered a form of addiction treatment? How common is this? And if this is what our treatment system, if this is what one treatment program in Oklahoma looks like, what does the rest of our treatment landscape look like? And is it working the way it's intended?
And one of the things that you found that was common throughout a lot of these programs was that it was very difficult, sometimes backbreaking work. I mean, it was not easy stuff. Chicken processing plants, but also, people working on oil platforms, working in zoos, working in nursing homes or warehouse jobs. So it was a hard manual labor, and you found that people were working really long hours as well.
That's right. One of the programs that I focused on in my book is called the Senecor Foundation. It was located at the time in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and it was sending people to work almost like a temporary labor force in really hard manual labor jobs, up to 80 hours per week. Some people worked at Exxon and Shell oil refineries for a time. Other people worked at an industrial laundromat, cleaning up after LSU football games, and they weren't getting paid for this work. They were basically getting paid in the form of a pack of cigarettes per week, and rarely getting counseling. The program made a lot of promises about the type of treatment that would be provided, that participants would receive medical care and counseling, and there was rarely time for any of that. Most of people's time was spent toiling in these really difficult manual labor jobs that often resulted in injuries.
So this is something that you understand, you report on as work therapy. It is an idea that dates back decades, really, and you did a lot to dig into the history of how Senecor Foundation, came about, and its practices, which are kind of non-standard. But this was an idea that you found really resonated with a lot of people as well. Can you talk about how work therapy gained popularity and acceptance?
Absolutely. I mean, this particular model really got started in 1958. by a former oil salesman who had struggled with alcoholism himself and had tried AA and hated it. He felt that people in Alcoholics Anonymous could lie about their sobriety, could relapse and pretend like it hadn't happened. And he wanted a community where people could really call each other out, where they could scream at each other and confront one another about deficits in their behavior or slip-ups that they might have had. And so he started this recovery community called Synanon. It ended up becoming something of a precursor to rehab in the United States. And among their practices was what he called the game. The game would come to be known as attack therapy, confrontation therapy. And essentially it was exactly this: participants calling each other out, holding each other accountable. And this program ended up spreading across the United States. It became a multi-million-dollar operation. And one of the ways that it supported itself was by putting participants to work. They had a number of for-profit industries that fed money straight back into the program. And over the ensuing decades, this model of rehab really gained an enormous amount of popularity, especially among lawmakers who were really excited about the prospect of a treatment program that didn't require any government funding. Senecor came from this Synanon treatment program. It was kind of another offshoot of this Synanon. And Ronald Reagan actually visited Synanon and gave the program. Ronald Reagan actually visited Senecor, I should say, and gave the program a resounding endorsement by specifically praising this unpaid work. Eventually, Synanon became something of a cult. I mean, it really devolved into an organization that enriched its founder. He started a mercenary army, made assassination attempts, ordered vasectomies, ordered people to shave their heads. It really devolved into something that was very cult-like. And I think the result of that it shows just how easily people in these types of programs can be exploited when the program is about breaking them down and really pushing them to the very bottom before remaking them and building people back up.
Sure. And of course, you're talking about an incredibly vulnerable population, people who are in recovery, sometimes, actively recovering from um, drug addiction. You mentioned this appeal that it had to lawmakers. And we should say, in addition to your book, you did this 8-part series with Reveal, and it's an excellent podcast. It's well worth the listen. But I want to take a listen because you did pull sound for that from President Reagan, where he was sort of talking about this work therapy model. Let's take a listen.
Senecor's approach spoke to Reagan.
I was glancing through your Senecor booklet, and I liked the very first sentence I read. In all the years that Senecor has been in business, rehabilitating lives, we have found that nothing works as well as work itself. And work is therapy. You feel better about yourself when you have something productive to do.
So there was this support from people like Ronald Reagan, but there were also some conditions, and you really get into those in your reporting, that facilitated the expansion of these kinds of programs. Senecor obviously was a big one, but there was, I think the main thing that started to change in the last, few decades was the redefining of what it means to be an addict. And you explore that, its implications, how it was different in many ways from how people were defined and regarded during the crack epidemic. But could you kind of spell that out a little bit for us?
Yeah, during the crack cocaine epidemic, our country's main approach to addiction was to treat it as a moral failing. I mean, that had been decades of U.S. drug policy, was to view addiction as a criminal act, one that really deserved and required punishment in order to contain it. And so during the crack cocaine epidemic, you really saw the consequence of that. People were incarcerated in mass, especially Black and brown drug users. And there was really very little sympathy for drug users. In the media, these individuals, especially Black mothers, were demonized. Then fast forward to the opioid epidemic. It started as a pain pill epidemic. It mainly affected white communities. And our country adopted a very different approach. Suddenly you had lawmakers referring to addiction as a disease. There was this feeling that a pharmaceutical company had really started this epidemic, Purdue Pharma, and they were the villains in this story, and people who were addicted were victims. So it was a very different approach to addiction. And as a result, we undertook this enormous expansion of treatment. First with the launch of Suboxone, the gold standard opioid addiction medication in 2002, and then with the Affordable Care Act, which expanded coverage of addiction treatment to millions of Americans. So we really undertook this very different approach to addiction. And I think there was this hope that treatment would be the solution to this growing drug epidemic. But what we saw over time is that overdoses actually continue to increase. And the system that we have is really not functioning in the way that lawmakers had once hoped.
And so the expansion of the Affordable Care Act was kind of one manifestation, one way that this for-profit rehab industry grew. Another was criminal justice reform. And I wonder if you could sort of take us through how that played out as you have, courts like lawmakers perhaps looking for alternatives to the punitive model, sometimes state law requiring an alternative to be provided.
Absolutely. This unpaid labor model that we were discussing, I think that it has seen a resurgence during the past 25 plus years of the epidemic, because now we have many more drug court and diversion court programs that aim to provide people who are charged with drug-related offenses with alternatives to incarceration into jail. And that in theory is a really great thing. But what I found is that a lot of these programs that courts are using are not necessarily providing evidence-based care. They're not providing people with access to addiction treatment medications, which are proven to reduce overdose deaths by more than 50%. A lot of these programs are longer term. They're often punishment driven, and they require uncompensated work. And as we were discussing earlier, it's very easy to exploit such a vulnerable population of people, and for that unpaid labor arrangement to turn into something exploitative.
And so, as courts are looking for alternatives and they're looking for inexpensive alternatives, they're also looking for ways to reduce the prison population as it exists, which is also really costly. So, you have this situation where they're often being, these rehab facilities are being used as alternative, but also as a cudgel of sorts, or can be held, the additional punishment can be held over the heads of people who are sent to these facilities if they don't follow along, if they don't comply. And so that vulnerability that you're talking about is increased. And you talked to some people, you talked to many people that have been through these programs, and their stories are really harrowing, but you found people who felt that they were really trapped in a system where they were having to work brutal jobs, very long hours for zero compensation, but the alternative would be to be facing, long felony sentences in prison.
That's right. For all the cultural change that we've seen around addiction in this country, there are still many people who believe that the best way to treat someone who's addicted is through punishment, is through breaking them down until they almost no longer resemble themselves. And there's this belief that work is going to transform people. Um, I know from reading studies on this that work is an essential element of long-term recovery. I mean, someone who enters recovery or is aiming to be sober really requires a lot of resources in order to be effective. This is what researchers refer to as recovery capital. These are the mixture of resources that people need in order to enter and sustain long-term recovery. And that can include community, social support, housing, job, food, transportation. So work is certainly a really important aspect of that. But I talked to hundreds of people who went through these types of programs, and many of them described this feeling of being forced to work in an unpaid job, often dangerous unpaid job, as creating a feeling of hopelessness, of um, a lack of worth. And that is very detrimental for somebody who's trying to recover from addiction.
So we mentioned, that this can be a very profitable industry, and part of that is because many of these either sober living facilities or rehabs are very focused on billable services, things like urine screens or 30-day rehab programs. Can you talk about how the focus on those services in some ways can create an additional problem for people who are trying to recover in terms of um, when that program ends and additional vulnerabilities that may come with that kind of arbitrary timeline?
Absolutely. So we now know that 30-day programs, someone who completes a 30-day program, is actually more likely to overdose and die in the year after treatment than someone who failed to complete that program at all. So, and 30-day programs are often the maximum amount of days that insurance companies are willing to cover. So people literally go into these 30-day programs, um, successfully complete them, even programs with the best of intentions, successfully complete this program, leave the program, then they inevitably relapse. And that actually places them at greater risk of overdose. Um,
And
what
can
I
you
found,
explain why that is? I mean, can you kind of explain just, from a medical standpoint, why they'd be more vulnerable?
absolutely. And by the way, this risk also exists for people who are incarcerated. So someone who's leaving jail and prison is also at far greater risk of overdose death. And the reason that is because someone typically entering one of these facilities becomes abstinent from their substance or opioid of choice. And after a long period of abstinence, their tolerance level for that drug goes down. So when they leave the program, and and often relapse, they take the same amount of that substance that they would typically take, except now that amount of substance is too much. It's too much, and that's how it leads to overdose, and sometimes that's how it becomes fatal, particularly in this day and age when fentanyl is cut into so many of the drugs that are available for sale on the street. um, Using the same amount of the drug that someone always used can prove deadly.
The terrible reality there is that if somebody leaves a 30-day program and relapses, they once again become a profit source potentially for some of these rehab facilities, and so it doesn't necessarily create a sense of trying to get somebody to the next level of accomplishment. It is almost diminishing their potential customer base for them to be successful.
That's right. I mean, I spoke with a lot of treatment facility owners who are really frustrated by this limitation that is often imposed by insurance companies. And then there are a lot of treatment facilities that just have built this high relapse rate into their business model. I talked with one treatment company owner who referred to this as a cycler. You know, people go in, they come out, they relapse, and then they come back in again. And he actually employed staff who would call former patients of his facility, find out if they relapsed, and then, especially if they had really good paying insurance policies, re-enroll them in the treatment program. So it really does become this cycler of repeat customers.
You also found in California that after they adopted some criminal justice reforms, that there were some facilities that were actually kind of getting rid of their regular customers in preferring this steady stream that was state funded, that was going to be coming through the courts to them. And, we're a little bit more of a known quantity in terms of the money and the dollars that would attend um, their arrival.
That's right. I think what we have found in the aftermath of the Affordable Care Act and other similar state level policies, treatment facilities follow the money. That's not always necessarily a bad thing. Treatment facilities do have to stay open, and many of these treatment facilities are providing very good services. I mean, treatment can be valuable for many people, but when treatment facilities are also pursuing, what's going to make the most money or the most profit for that facility, it's not necessarily always following what's in the best interest of the patient. And so you see facilities really adopting really predatory business tactics in order to make the most profit that they can. You know, um, Doing daily urine screens, which are really not necessary for care, and billing thousands of dollars for them, or utilizing marketing companies that pay what's known as body brokers to go out and find rehab patients with the best paying insurance policies to then send them to specific rehab programs that may not be the best fit for them. So you have a whole infrastructure now that has been created that's about bringing people into programs that may not be the best fit for the patients who are going to them.
I think you touch on, and it is important to note that obviously rehab and sober recovery programs work for people. They can be incredibly helpful. They can be life saving, and so there are a lot of benefits to a lot of programs. When it comes to regulation, though, you were finding that these programs were not necessarily regulated. That's sometimes a state by state basis. Can you talk about what programs you found, whether the regulations were helpful, what kind of oversight is given to either rehab facilities or sober recovery homes?
Absolutely. So each state regulates rehabs very differently. There are very few states that regulate sober living homes. So these are typically places where people who are leaving treatment go to live and be among other sober people. But oftentimes they're run by treatment facilities themselves, who are exerting an enormous amount of control over those participants and may not be imposing that much oversight over them. So you see a lot of people going into sober living homes and relapsing, and oftentimes those relapses are fatal. And then you have, licensed treatment facilities, and I'll talk about specifically California, but it's very similar in other states as well, where dangerous things might be going on. There's one facility that I wrote about in my book that was over medicating patients to the point of impairment. And there were actually numerous patients who died in that facility as a result, partially as a result of receiving medications that record showed were not prescribed to them. And there were years of these deaths occurring, and still regulators did not succeed in shutting that program down. The program did eventually shut down after the owner went into debt over wrongful death lawsuits. But I've seen time and again in California, Florida, Louisiana, and many other states, patients and their families file complaints about dangerous, exploitative, abusive practices. Regulators come in, they offer the treatment program the opportunity to correct the problem. That correction is usually documented in some sort of form or a filing that the rehab makes. And then the problems continue. And they're given many chances again and again before something of consequence actually happens.
And
And
you
in the cases that I explored in this book, nothing of consequence ever came from law enforcement or regulators against some of these programs.
Right, and you also found that some companies, if they were forced to shut down, very often would reopen just with a different article of incorporation and a different name, and with many of the same participants leading them. Um,
That's right.
I want to ask you though. I mean, I think some people would say, like, what's so wrong with the idea of work therapy? It's a model that is, therapy can be incredibly expensive. Most people can't afford to go to rehab. So if you have a model where you have people working, their labor goes to sustain this facility. It allows you to get the treatment that you need, and certainly you talk to people for whom it worked, who swear by this model and say that it led to their sobriety. So for people who would push back and say, well, why not this? What would you say?
I mean, I would say these programs are meeting an unmet need in a way. People do require longer term care and longer term treatment. And it is very beneficial for people to live among other sober people, to form community with them, to support one another, and to find ways to support themselves. I mean, these are all aspects that studies have shown are really important for recovery. I think where it can go wrong is when it becomes exploitative and it becomes a means to a profit for a program. What I found with the Senecor Foundation is that rehab participants were bringing in far more money than the rehab facility actually needed to operate that facility. And so they were working, incredibly long hours in ways that were counterproductive to their recovery. And it was not serving them, it was serving the facility.
You also had to work really hard to track down employees that were, participants in this model. They're very often farmed out, in small numbers or larger numbers on a range of projects and jobs. In some cases, you were actually kind of following these work vans as they left the rehab facilities to find out where they were going and then trying to talk to the workers. And you had, people that wanted to talk to you, but often felt very afraid to do so. There were people that really felt like they were being held captive in some of these facilities.
Yes. I mean, and it wasn't just me, I was working with colleagues on this podcast series called American Rehab. And we followed several work vans. And what we later learned is that rehab participants were told not to speak with us, and there would be consequences if they spoke with journalists. And so there was really very little opportunity for participants who were in the program at that time to really let their concerns be known. If you violated a rule in this program, you could be sent back to where you came from, which was in oftentimes court or jail. And so there were significant consequences, potential consequences for speaking out. In the book, I followed this one young man named Chris Kuhn, who was court ordered into the program. And he was injured on the job. He didn't receive adequate medical care while he was in the program. He continues to have medical issues from that injury. And when he approached his supervisor at Senecor to ask for better care, he basically was told, well, you can go back to where you came from. And where he came from was jail. He faced a potential prison sentence of 5 years. And so he just put up with this lack of medical care for his injury. And there were other injuries that were far worse. I mean, I spoke with someone who fractured part of their skull, someone who broke his back on the job, another person who broke their ankle. These are very serious injuries that occurred, and many of the people who were injured on the job there didn't feel like they received adequate care.
So this movement towards, a more perhaps merciful view of somebody who's an addict, recognizing it as a disease and perhaps not viewing them as a criminal or somebody who has failed, morally. You, I think, believe that maybe that's shifting back again. And I wonder if you could talk about the trend line that you see and that you have seen in your reporting regarding how people who have addiction are treated and regarded by the system.
Absolutely. I mean, I will say that I think over the course of this opioid epidemic, as more people have come to accept this idea of addiction as a disease, more people have also begun to speak out about their addictions, to speak out about their recovery. And I don't see that going away anytime soon. I think there are these really inspiring movements of people who are demanding better for themselves, for their friends, their communities, and for their family members. But I do also see this kind of trend that reminds me of the crack cocaine epidemic. States are passing mandatory minimum sentences related to fentanyl. We're seeing nationwide crackdowns on homelessness. And we're also seeing cuts to funding for treatment and harm reduction services. And the past couple of years, we've seen these declines in overdose deaths. But what researchers are starting to flag is that many of these recent policy changes are likely to lead to an increase in overdose deaths. So I'm really curious to see what happens over the next few years as we start to see more people cut off from treatment, less access to harm reduction services that have saved lives, and as we start to see more people arrested and incarcerated for drug-related offenses.
Your reporting has been very important, and a lot of people have paid attention to it. Senator Elizabeth Warren, there was regulators in Texas and Louisiana who began investigations. So I would imagine that's gratifying. And at the same time, the work that you're doing is incredibly emotional, I would think. You're talking to people, family members who've lost loved ones to overdose, people that you have interviewed that have since died because of addiction and overdose. Can you just talk a little bit about how this reporting has been for you as a reporter?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a hard question. When I first started working on the book in earnest, it was right before the COVID-19 pandemic, and I was also pregnant at the time. And I was starting to do ride-alongs with the Needle Exchange here in Oakland, California, where I'm based, and really was trying to get to know the community of people who are unhoused here and actively struggling with addiction. So I could really understand what the barriers to access of addiction treatment are. And then the pandemic hit, and many of us locked down, and I lost contact with a lot of those individuals. And only later did I learn that many of them did overdose and die during that time period. And many of the people who attended Senecor Foundation with Chris Kuhn, the person in this book, there were many people who also passed away and died of overdoses. So I feel like I've gained a real sense of the stakes involved when it comes to addiction. People's lives really are on the line, especially when they don't have access to quality addiction treatment.
Well, Shoshana Walter, she is a reporter for the Marshall Project. Her new book is called Rehab, an American Scandal. Shoshana, thank you so much for being here today, for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. A new dark comedy from the Emmy-nominated creator of sitcoms like Boy Meets World and My Two Dads is set to make its world premiere here in Jacksonville. Here to tell us about it is Michael Jacobs, the author of the new play, Harlan and Bronna Jump Out the Window. Michael, welcome.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks for being here.
Nice to be here.
We're also joined by the show's director, Brian Neese, artistic director of Lumen Repertory Theater. Welcome back, Brian.
Well, I'm good to be here. By the way, Michael's directing the show. I'm just the artistic director of the company.
Gotcha.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's start with you, Michael, about the creation of this. I mean, this is the story of a wealthy New York City couple, but it explores a lot of themes that are both kind of relevant and current, and I think will speak to people. Tell us a little bit about what this play is about.
It's really about, in the end, it's a metaphor for what we're currently going through with our world situation.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not entertaining. What's entertaining is a couple who live on the 34th floor in Manhattan who look down upon all of the people on the street and are informed that they're down to their last $1 million. Now, that's a dilemma a lot of us would like to have.
Yeah.
So automatically the play is tone deaf. So I think what happens to them is that they realize that they've got a choice, so says their financial advisor, that they can live on their 8%, $80,000 a year in Manhattan, and he'll instruct them how to do it. After he leaves, she says, or we could spend it all and jump out the window. And the play is about their adventure in getting rid of all of their resources, much as the world is doing now, and deciding in the end, is humanity down there on the street worth knowing? And that's the joy of the play, their trajectory.
And so you're talking, I mean, it's metaphorical, but it's also exploring, themes of privilege, social collapse. Right. I mean, so you are delving into the dark stuff, but it's a comedy.
Yes, it's very funny.
Yeah.
And the reason I think it's funny is Mel Brooks, I think, was asked, what is the difference between comedy and tragedy? And his answer was, tragedy is when I have a hangnail. Comedy is when you fall into an open manhole and die.
Yeah, right.
So I think that an audience getting to watch the travail of people that they would kind of like to be in trouble will entertain them.
Yeah. Brian, talk, if you will, about the kind of what the significance is of having a play of this caliber and someone of Michael's talent premiering this show here in Jacksonville.
Yeah, it's huge. We're only in our third season, and we said, as Northeast Florida's only fully professional nonprofit theater company, that we were going to do big things and take big swings. We do that in investing in equity actors and in designers. We do that in debuting new work. And because of the way this came about, an old high school connection between our board president and Michael rekindled. And then Michael actually deciding, he wanted to work with me in some way. I still don't know why he decided to do that. But we decided to take a big swing. And if he's willing to come here, we're willing to put it up. And I agree with Michael. The audience is going to be immensely entertained. And we also play with some of the tools of theater so that the fourth wall gets broken in some unexpected, funny and unique ways as well. Again, taking a big swing with something that could just be a kitchen sink drama.
Not everybody knows what it means to break the fourth wall. Just explain to us, first of all, what that is and kind of what it, the import it carries or kind of how it plays with the audience.
Sure. So observed theater would be you're watching people who are not aware of your presence as an audience member, and they never turn to you, address you, speak to you, acknowledge your presence. That happens in this play quite often, that different characters and different people you may not expect, even technicians and others, would recognize the audience's presence. So we are embracing the idea that we are putting on a play for you and you're in on the joke.
Yeah. Michael, your work has included, we mentioned a little bit of it, but Boy Meets World, Dinosaurs, Charles in Charge, also the movie Quiz Show from the 90s, which was a huge, and you also were nominated for an Academy Award for that.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of history in Hollywood. How did you come to, decide that Jacksonville was going to be the place for this premiere? Just he alluded to kind of a rekindled connection from way back.
Rob, who's standing in the corner over there.
That we're supposed to. It's like the fourth wall is there.
I'm breaking the fourth wall right now. The phone rings and Rob says, "Would you consider working with us? I'm the president of a board of an equity company in Jacksonville." So immediately you take that seriously. And I remember Rob because I think I played Richard III in my senior year of high school, and we needed spear carriers. Uh-huh. And I saw Rob in the hallway, and I said, "Come, carry a spear." And that started a lifelong love of the theater for him. Wow. So I remember that. And when he called, I said, it happens that I've had an idea for years, and it might be time to write this play. And what I always do is I call Elliot Brown. Elliot is my good friend, and he was my theater attorney for the plays that I used to write. And I said, "I have an idea." He said, "Tell me the idea." And I said, "Yeah, but if you don't like it, you'll tell me, so I'll tell you." I tell him the idea. He says, "You have to write it. And it's perfect for you to try it out with these people who are doing this good work. Because I explain, see, Brian, he won't say it about himself, but he does plays that are so good for this community and that no one else will do them, and they succeed. And Rob on the board will say, "Why can't you do Gypsy?" And I don't think you even have heard of Gypsy. and his success here with Lumen is really attractive, and I'm hoping I can contribute with this play.
When you talk about an equity troupe here, that has to do with the actors that are participating, also the professional level of the theater. This is performers are paid for their work, which is, unusual in this market. I think it's alone in this market in that respect.
There's one other outfit, one or two that
Okay.
pay, but none that are affiliated with Actors Equity.
Okay. And so that appealed to you, Michael, because you just kind of know that is bringing a level of talent and
I know that they're serious.
Mhm.
I know that his aspiration is up there on a level that you've got to take him seriously. And then, I knew Rob, but I didn't know Brian.
Mhm.
And as I got to meet him, you're very lucky to have him. His desire, what he wants to bring the audience. All my life, I've tried to honor the audience. Every actor I've ever spoken to is, who are we doing this for? In the moment that I sense that an actor is unaware that there are people watching that have paid to see them, then we have the discussion.
Yeah.
And what Brian was saying about breaking the fourth wall in this piece, the audience is representative of the humanity that Harlan and Bronna have never really met.
Mm-hmm.
And the experience for the audience is very similar, the best I've ever seen. We've talked about this. David Cromer, who's a very successful director in New York, did a version of Our Town. And as soon as I saw it at the Barrow, at the Playhouse downtown, 3 seconds into the production, I turned to the person I was with and I said, "We're dead. We're in the graveyard with Emily Webb. We're going to come back into life." And then all these curtains were pulled in his production, and you got the smells and sounds of life. And then we returned as the audience
Oh, wow.
to being Emily Webb.
How powerful.
Phenomenal. It's not quite as powerful as that, but it's very entertaining what we're doing.
Brian, he speaks about your your desire to bring great theater to Jacksonville. And we should say that you were a winner this year of the Cultural Council Awards. You were named the 2025 Arts Innovator by the Cultural Council. So congratulations on that. Will you just tell us, this is a show that is going to premiere here. There are also some opportunities for people to interact with Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about, where the performance is, how people can participate,
Sure.
and just briefly, if you will, remind us of the fact that you try to get students to come
absolutely.
and participate.
Yeah, so the show opens September 19th, runs through October 4th at Good Shepherd Episcopal Church in Lovett Hall there. We have an opening night gala where for a little bit extra, you get to show up early, complimentary drinks, food, etc., get to mingle with Michael and some other New York representatives, our cast, creatives, some other luminaries in the city, so forth. Go to lumenrep.org for all the information, all the tickets, all of that. And if you are a high school or college student, you can use the code NEXTGEN, all caps, one word, and your ticket is free. Not to the gala, but to the performance, you can come for free. We want to tear down all of the barriers that prevent the next generation from experiencing and falling in love with professional theater.
Well, congratulations, Break a Leg. I'm so pleased you're doing this. Brian Neese and Michael Jacobs, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ann.
All right, up next, social commentary mixed with ambitious Americana.
AEG presents Sierra Farrell's Shoot for the Moon tour. The West Virginia-born singer-songwriter and multi-instrumentalist brings her Americana and roots music to the St. Augustine Amphitheater, Friday, September 12th. Tickets and information available at theamp.com. Lutheran Social Services presents Two Piano Journey, a benefit featuring mother-son piano duo Chris and Michelle Kuo. Saturday, September 13th at 7 p.m. at Friday Musicale. Next stop, Carnegie Hall. Tickets available at lssjacks.org.
Let's talk trees. Northeast Florida is losing tree cover, according to a recent state report. Join us September 17th for Adapt State of the Canopy, a discussion with local officials about their response to the report. Register to join us for this free event at wjct.org/events.
Can the president demand a cut of a business? Can the president unilaterally impose tariffs? Can the president blacklist your firm? We don't know any of that.
Except President Donald Trump is doing all of that and meeting little resistance. Is he changing the very way corporations do business in the United States? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
President Trump campaigned on a promise to crack down on immigration. Since January, nearly 200,000 people have been deported. His administration is employing new tactics to reach their goals, like detaining people at their immigration hearings. We talk about these moves and the people targeted by them next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. From intricate orchestrations to gritty guitar solos, Jacksonville-based Moonstalker pushes the musical boundaries of traditional Americana. Here to tell us about the newly released fourth album, Shadows in Blue, is Moonstalker singer-songwriter Mark Williams. Welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
It is great to have you. We're also joined by Arvid Smith, local musical legend and guitarist for Moonstalker. Good morning, Arvid.
Good morning. Great to be.
So, Mark, you have shared the stage with some of the biggest names in music, including Arlo Guthrie, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, Willie Porter. You've also written music for the former host of this show, Al Lutzon's podcast, State of the Reunion. But this album is, different from that work and your previous work. Tell us a little bit about this fourth Moonstalker album.
Well, I always try to do something different because I get bored. So even on this album, there's like 4 or 5 different genres that we cross, but all my records are that way. I find it interesting to take things that I've learned over the years, whether it's Hispanic music, to put a little flavor in there, or a little Celtic music, and you take those things and you put them into your soup, and it becomes something that is you and genuine. Because I'm not from Ireland, I'm not from Spain, I'm not from Africa or anywhere else, but here in the U.S. So my influences are vast, though, and those vast influences come out in ways that you never expect.
What is it? What appeals to you as a listener? What kind of music speaks to you, and what kinds of things do you look to grab and kind of put in your soup?
Things that seem real and pull at your heart. But I love lyrics that are smart and interesting and original. And I love music that, like, when I hear Arvid play, oh my gosh, he takes me to these places that I want to go. And I want my music to take you to places that you are glad you're going, even if you didn't expect it. So on the new album, Shadows in Blue, we have humor. We touch on subjects such as what is going on today with war, the political atmosphere, but I want it to be coming from the soul, not from this anger or anything. Like one of the songs I wrote on here, To Be So Cold. When I first wrote this song, I wrote it with a bit of anger in me, but as I let it settle in, I took some of the anger out, and the question is, with everything that's going on, I see that the people in power pit us against ourselves, and we have this turmoil going on. But the bridge says, if you have a heart, if you have a soul, don't let go. If you have a heart, if you have a soul, don't let go. So there was anger to start with, but then there's hope because we have it, And in songwriting, I like to do things like that. But songs come to you, like I wrote Me and Buddha on the Backyard Swing.
Mm-hmm.
I have a, excuse me, I have a Buddha sitting in my backyard, and right next to Buddha is a swing that was there when I moved into the house a few years ago. So I was sitting there having a drink, and all of a sudden, these words they just started coming. Me and Buddha I'm sitting with Buddha on the backyard swing, having a pint and listening to him sing Hallelujah and the Sultans of Swing. And this is just all coming out of me. And I was like, oh, I got to capture it because the gods are good to me today. So I ran, grabbed a pencil and paper and started just
writing it
all
down.
right, yep. What are you giving me? What'd you say there? And it just all came out. So it's a song with grace towards Buddha, but a sense of humor, a look at the world today. The words came in a matter of minutes.
Let's take a listen if we can, because we've got a little sample of one of the songs on this new release. It's called As the Stars Look On.
As the stars look on helplessly, as the stars look on helplessly.
Arvid, playing on this, I mean, the lyrics in that song kind of shift midway through about who's looking helplessly at the stars versus the stars looking helplessly on us. And it is, I mean, you're a guitarist, you're a great sitarist. How important are the lyrics to you when you're performing alongside in Moonstalker?
Well, I think I make my best contribution when I'm in service to the song, so not to overpower anything, but to color it and decorate it. In this particular song, Mark's, it's the most varied group of or collection of music things that I've participated in since I can remember. And like I said, Marx does a stream of consciousness thing with that little Buddha thing he was talking about, but this was very calculated and very set. And the line that the stars look on helplessly, you can't beat that.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Particularly for an anti-war song.
So this kind of album release that you're having is at the Friday Music Hall Concert Hall on Oak Street. It's Saturday from 8 to 10.
Yes.
What can people expect?
Okay, so we have Ample Angst opening up the show,
Mm-hmm.
which is Mike Bernos and his trio, and that should be beautiful. He's a good songwriter, and he's going to be playing piano on a couple of my songs. We have, besides my regular band, which is a great band, Ken Anoff on drums, Roy Peak on bass, Arvid on guitar and sitar. He'll be playing sitar, Sobahar.
We're going to have to leave it there. I'm sorry. We're right up against the clock. Okay. It's a Saturday
and
show.
My wife, Jeej.
All right. Join us tomorrow. You've been listening to First Coast Connect.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Congaree & Penn, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpenn.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect,